We had hail here last night. That whatever was tornadoes going through.
Sorry.
We had hail here yesterday afternoon.
Oh, hail.
That front that was causing the tornadoes came up passed through here.
Ah, yes.
And I live on high ground in a pass, so I get like a funnel effect. I'm between two in a pass between two elevations.
Hmm.
So I have a pretty prevalent wind, and it's sort of 5% greater than surrounding. So oh well. Not a fan of wind, but I got it now. Pretty soon the wind turns into breeze.
Ah, yes.
Terminology, yeah. It drops the lethality.
Oops, damn it. Ugh, crap. Come on. Okie dokie. Time to begin. Well, hello there. It's 17 March, a Monday. Time for dis and dat. I'm going to extend what I was yakking about on Friday. Um, not because I don't have anything better to talk about, but that I just didn't get to it. And so I had some interests that I'm still, well, I'm just doing some reviews. So what I was thinking about on Friday was the idea of ILF as the opposite of wealth. And can we describe ILF as not unlike wealth as having a diaphanous veil? That is, there's the discussion of the so-called veil of money as a veil. But then there's also the metaphorical veil of ignorance and a variety of other veils. And if we talk about it not qualitatively, but quantitatively, is there a real or a nominal veil, mathematically speaking? And do veils define externality in how they operate as diaphanous, as filters of one kind or another? And without going off into the weeds, what kind of surfaces a veil, but that's a whole nother set of stories. So there are some, um, there's a literature that has even actually been covered by, I think, the Reserve Bank of New York, but not that that's a major deal, but at least somebody over there was thinking about it a decade or more than a decade ago. And the idea of quantitative approaches to geography or space and their relationship to financial geography or, uh, well, a variety of fields that would discuss certain type of areas and locations and regions in terms of money stuff that would be interesting to the the Reserve Bank. So from that particular article, there's a discussion of major unresolved issues. It would be, and so I'm going to discuss some of those, introduce some of those ideas, only because it's for my own review, because I'd actually read, once I came across the article, I was reminded that I actually read the damn thing a while back. Um, so there are unresolved issues in the application of certain methodologies, and this article is a little old in the sense that it predates a kind of discussion, a more recent discussion on a field or a subfield, which is problematic from within geography on the issue of what counts as a technical geography. And it is, of course, the usual discourse problems of geography. That is, humanist geographers or geographers who emphasize human or geography as opposed to physical geographers. And then, of course, there are social geographers and political geographers and a whole bunch of other types of geographers. And it is those divisions that, of course, plague the field because the nice thing about geography it is, or at least is that it is one of the last liberal arts. That is that you can pretty much study any damn thing, and it suffers for that very reason. For example, film geography or the geography of film is a problematic area that has both qualitative and quantitative problems, and it's quite amusing for all of its unresolved issues. But since some of the major lights in the field are either retired or dead, we should not worry too much about it. So it would be possible to revisit each of the identified categories of methods in quantitative geography to discuss unresolved issues and frontiers for future research. Now, this relates to Doreen Massey because, Doreen Massey in her later life, aside from talking about locational and distance issues, distance issues, was also certainly interested in intersectional issues. That is, what the relation in terms of feminist geography, the issue of gender and distance and division, and that there are certain intersectional or phenomenal kind of elements that had to do with and feminist geography does study that a lot. Women's spaces, as it were, or gender divided spaces, which are also quite fascinating. But that's not what I'm interested in at the present moment. I mean, it's interesting reading, but it's nothing that I'm currently trying to figure out. So, there are overarching themes, and they're associated with unresolved issues in quantitative geography. I know that sounds really dry and stupid, but there's a general problem of spatial autocorrelation, which is a way in which you talk about how do you correlate things on surfaces and in space and using spatial data, and that's sort of what I'm have been interested in for oh many years. Let's put it that way. Um, so themes of this type are spatial data uncertainty, abstraction and frame independence, spatial and spatio-temporal patterns, and intercategory integration. So that's a whole bunch of stuff that has various moments. And as I was just mentioning, that there are these subfields, and when you look at the Wikipedia section on technical geography, you find that there's a minor kerfuffle between whether you can talk about geomatics, that is, spatial data, in the much more global or intergalactic sense, and geography, which it's just a generational thing, I suppose. But it's a generational thing that really, in terms of quantifying stuff in geography, has not been fully plumbed. Let's put it that way. So, in other words, if you, for example, study legal geography, you don't. It doesn't verge into political economy analysis, even though it has to or it should. And the fact that it doesn't, except for a few folks, is sort of a detriment, even though ultimately that's what decides stuff. It's like Trump talking about, oh, it's just a line between Canada and the United States. It's not just a fucking line. It's a border. It's an actual border. Anyway, so in particular, there may be a potential for spatial data uncertainty or error to propagate through analysis in different ways, and this can vary by method. And Goodchild of 2008. He's written some of the major books on some of these issues. Reviews related issues and preliminary progress on this front But it remains an unresolved issue as to exactly what data uncertainty does to geographic analyses. And needless to say, there's a lot more integration of geographic issues in, for example, the United Kingdom for a variety of reasons. That is not quite as operative in the US for all the usual reasons, and well, some of which can even, lurch into the current crisis in weather forecasting and stuff, which is, yes, a geographic field as much as anything else. That is in terms of, meteorology as a kind of spatial problem. Anyway, a model, whether data is statistical or mathematical in orientation, is an abstraction of reality. Hopefully, people don't have a problem with that. As discussed previously, a model reflects intended and unintended relationships. And I think, speaking in terms of my own kind of theoretical interests, it is this intended and unintended thing that is part of the problem. Uh, that makes it semantic on the one hand. On the other hand, it's quite material, and that's kind of the tension between the qualitative and the quantitative. And so it is about knowledge, the same kind of knowledge I was talking about several weeks ago with the Dutch economy. It's really actually no different in that context. But yes, I know you have to sort of explain the connection and then plow through the literature. If nothing else, we're now keenly aware that our models of reality have much potential to influence or bias analysis. For example, and without going into a long discussion of it, this is the crux of the modifiable areal unit problem that has been there forever, and it's gotten resolved, and it sort of resolves itself down to, what kind of variables you're using, how many variables, and blah 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 blah. So there's ample evidence in many application domains that model results are sensitive or influenced by spatial data scale and or unit definition. Ultimately, it all is about unit definition, but whatever. Tobler highlights that model specification, or rather incorrect model specification, which is this relates to the identification problem that I was discussing a couple weeks ago, is a likely source of error, resulting in an inability to statistically confirm certain spatial relationships. And of course, defining the spatial relationships is really difficult too, because the easy way to do it, of course, is to assume that space is relatively uniform, and it's just a bunch of polygons, each with its own little center, and you just measure polygonal distances, and that's fine. But at some moment, you suddenly realize that there are only specific places that are perfectly flat, and that really allow you to work in these areas. And for whatever reason, this is, of course, that abstraction problem. This is referred to as frame dependence, or rather that a particular statistical test is dependent on the spatial frame utilized in a different frame may produce differing results. And then that gets into, unit problems and other kind of stupid stuff. And your own ability to hack, certain probabilistic issues. But anyway, somewhat related to this issue is the work by Murray, highlighting that certain spatial optimization models are sensitive to spatial data scale and or unit definition, because that's the problem with spatial data anyway, and are therefore frame dependent. Finally, Florex and Ray demonstrated, and this is the last century, right? Demonstrated that the spatial lag model was sensitive to the relationships specified in the spatial weights matrix. So the point is, of course, that you, rather than look at a system of linear things, you look at it as a function of a matrix, and then you've assigned all these weights to the data and blah, 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 blah. So, and we have better computers now, so it makes it less stupid. And um, and some of the software is much better now too. So thus, that issue is that data could vary by scale and unit definition. The underlying model is but one abstraction of reality, and others could exist. And parameters in models, remember, we were talking about parameters, about partial and full, as it were. Parameters in models sometimes reflect limited knowledge. See, we're back to knowledge again. Um, These remain unresolved issues in general terms, but research has already begun to address particular cases. For example, Wong of 2002 introduces variants of spatial segregation measures that are less frame dependent. Now, whether that gives you anything is another question. In spatial optimization modeling, Murray introduces a new model for set covering that is less frame dependent. Finally, Alstad and Gaddis of 2006 develop an approach to make the specification of the spatial weights matrix more endogenous as opposed to more exogenous, I suppose, and better justified. The point here is that you ask certain questions about how linear is your model, how optimizable is it going to give you, decent analytic data? And, all of this is the front end is the identification problem. An increasing need in geographic analysis with enhanced and great abundance of spatial information is better accounting for patterns and shapes. And, having spent time figuring this crap out, it is GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, and a lot of it is just trying to clean up data, which is ugly. And AI will help that at some bright and shining moment. Um, Not only to detect spatial patterns as reviewed previously, but developing models that reflect patterns and or help to produce particular patterns in the case of prescription. So the prescriptive rather than descriptive element is important, of course, for, planning, management, et cetera, et cetera. The point, of course, is what are your real assumptions, and if you're stupidly crazy like me, is to try and pick kind of things that you can measure a little better than, well, labor. You can measure, sort of money, and maybe you can measure perception, which is a whole nother set of issues there. But that's way off the reservation, as it were. Of course, the first step is being able to quantify aspects of pattern or shape. Thus, the work of Williams and Wentz, 2008, as an example, is a noteworthy attempt to move into the direction of producing a pattern or shape once its specification can be given. Another example is enabling patterns, a measure of relative contiguity, which contiguity is about things that bump up against other things. And that is, you find edges or um, spaces that are contiguous and that do certain, develop certain ideas about, locational stuff. Enabling patterns that are more or less contiguous to be distinguished. Of course, these are specific instances of unresolved is a more general framework to evaluate and produce patterns using models. Now, pattern production in and of itself can be problematic, and some people don't want to think about it because it can get you off into a very strange topological area. But the topographic versus the topologic sort of thing, but it's actually kind of important if you're trying to figure out, space and time stuff. It perhaps not so obvious in the review of quantitative geography methods is work focusing on spatiotemporal patterns. Remember, we were talking about the difference between space, time, and space-time, because they are different, and trying to work through. And part of it is because David Harvey sort of suggests there are places to go through, and he doesn't quite get there. And I think he didn't give up on it so much that once you start getting into the weeds there, it's hard to come back to political questions, simply because it's really out there, but not really. And that's the point I've been trying to make. It most certainly is implied, but admitted not discussed in any detail. If we did discuss space-time approaches, it would likely have been in the GIS or ESDA sections, as work to date has been qualitative and visual. That's the division. In other words, maps are cool, but and pretty, but does it give us anything more than sort of ideographic, meaning can it achieve something more quantitative or nomothetic, as they say, which is a law-like. So thus, an unresolved issue is moving beyond the more descriptive geovisualization approaches for space-time analysis and establishing a mathematical framework for such a method. So there's work on this of the last 20 years, and there's cross-fertilization, interaction, the idea that a high-resolution spatial information, a regional optimization model, and a sub-area cellular growth simulation model are linked together. So what you can do is you can see how um, you have much more bigger data, more information. You can optimize, bigger spaces, let's put it that way, and some less linear in that context. And the idea of cellular growth, in particular, because there's an entire literature on cellular automata that that is evolutionarily interesting. And so that works for tracking animal movements or people movements or stuff like that. But this is done to evaluate population growth and spatial impacts, but regional decisions and changes are linked to local growth and development. So policy is another kind of issue. And there's interesting applications of this. I haven't spent the time to look at some things that are kind of that to me are very interesting, but probably not interesting to anybody else. And that is, for example, wolf patterns in the upper tier of the United States, and trying to work out the different. Well, and there's a literature. I'm not talking about anything new. It is the sort of claim that we got to shoot more wolves because they're decimating herds. Well, they really aren't, and it's just more jerk offs want to shoot animals, and that's pretty much the deal. They're just bored, and they want to, they're just yahoos about guns. But anyway, another example is the spatial optimization model detailed in 2009 for maximizing coverage in facility siting, which is kind of the thing for the last 1.25 centuries. The idea of, well, where are we going to put stuff? Where's the best place to put a factory, for example, or a shopping mall or something else? An approach is developed to solve the model using GIS, Geographic Information System-based methods, taking advantage of spatial relationships and knowledge, thereby reflecting an intelligent approach to searching space as opposed to unintelligent approaches to searching space. And while there's ample evidence of intercategory integration already occurring, certainly much remains possible. And further, important research questions will no doubt arise. So that's kind of what that is. And technical geography has its own place in Wikipedia. So the spatial data types a technical geographer as opposed to untechnical, I suppose, or anti-technical geographers employs what employs may vary widely. The data types that you employ may vary widely, including human and physical geography topics, with the common thread being the techniques and philosophies employed. Now, this is ontology, right? This is what ontology is about. To accomplish this, technical geographers often create their own software or scripts. So everyone's off, doing their own thing or making their own apps or whatever, and which can be applied more broadly by others. And so, on the one hand, you can do it for, tourism. On the other hand, I think it's really more important to see, capitalism is spreading here with all of its externalities and pollution and stupidity. And how can that be either constrained or eradicated or whatever? And so that's an interesting question. So I raised that question for myself. And last week, I didn't talk about it very much because I skipped ahead to read the Doreen Massey stuff. So I've included the stuff from Friday. And the original position, often referred to as the veil of ignorance, is a thought experiment often associated with the works of American legal philosopher, one could say he was a legal philosopher, John Rawls. In the original position, one is asked to consider which principles they would select for the basic structure of society. But they must select it as if They had no knowledge ahead of time what position they would end up having in that society. This choice is made from behind a veil of ignorance, not unlike the Trumpian wall, which prevents them from knowing their ethnicity, social status, gender, and crucially, in Rawls' formulation, their or anyone else's ideas about how to lead a good life. So it's about moral philosophy, right? Ideally, this would force participants to select principles impartially and rationally. And, so it's already kind of a rigged a model, but, it's still worth arguing because that's what philosophers do. In Rawls' theory, the original position plays the same role that the state of nature does in the social contract tradition of Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. The original position figures prominently in Rawls' 1971 book, A Theory of Justice. It has influenced a variety of thinkers from a broad spectrum of philosophical orientations because it does have a whole bunch of things that are applicable in a variety of ways. That Rawls, asks certain interesting questions about certain constraints on knowledge in order to make decisions. Rawls coined the phrase his original position and veil of ignorance. However, the same thought experiment had already been described earlier in Social Choice by William Vickrey and John Harsanyi. And unless you think that that's unimportant, this is overlaps with the work of John Nash and, whatever, Beautiful Mind, etc. Um, and so it's kind of working through a thing that we would ultimately see in game theory, who independently derived proofs showing a rational observer in the original position would adopt a utilitarian framework. Now that's a big advantage for some economists because that's the deal for classical economics is that it's more like that, which lends itself to marginal analysis than the other thing, which is much more messy, and that is, of course, heterodox methods that deal with ugly things like inequality and asymmetry. So in the 20th century, the veil of money was used to describe questions of stability and the exchangeability of money for interest or commodity in a macroeconomic model. In essence, as long as money can be treated like a commodity, that's Marx, there is no stickiness between money and goods or money and interest. Now, of course, there is, because that's the whole point, is interest rates and all that other stuff. So the veil of money and its related issue, the quantity theory of money, and this goes to Minsky, etc., have special importance in economic theory throughout the 20th century. Actually, 20th century economics can be interpreted as a sequence of theoretical answers to the question whether money is only a veil or not. Different theories can be judged by their implied ideas as to the neutrality of money, and that's something that Marx is asking the same question about. That it when you achieve the sort of analysis of the commodity and get to the commodity form of money, have you achieved a kind of neutrality that allows for certain kind of moral decisions to be made in better ways? And that's kind of, and without verging into modern money theory, but that's a kind of issue, and is interesting from a theoretical point of view, but also raises all kinds of other crazy issues that are worth studying. In economics, money illusion or price illusion is a cognitive bias where money is thought of in nominal rather than real terms. In other words, and in fact, to get Marx to talk about nominal versus real is often a problem because he sometimes confuses them. And I would say Engels in his editing probably does that as well. In other words, the face value, that is the nominal value of money, is mistaken for its purchasing power, that is its real value as opposed to its nominal value at a previous point in time. And you can develop all kind of math to figure that out, because it's really important for some people who you're trying to move capital around, and you're trying to build a business and blah 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 blah, and there's all kinds of other issues. So not only time series data is above, but also cross-sectional data, which depends on prices, which may vary geographically. For example, see, that's where we get back to geography, can be adjusted in a similar way. Now, that the similarity, is kind of the crux of the thing. For example, the total value of a good produced in a region or country depends on both the amount and the price. And to compare the output of different regions, the nominal output in a region can be adjusted by repricing the goods at common or average prices, which is all fine and good until some unpleasant person decides they want to impose tariffs. So you could, not that I'm going to do it, um, a maple syrup model. You could actually do a maple syrup model. And if I were younger and ensconced someplace, I'd probably do one just as a conference paper just to annoy people. But anyway, a reconstructed modern monetary theory are considered the Keynesian notions of uncertainty and liquidity preferences and Minsky, remember Minsky, Allen's dad, money manager economy. The new paradigm may be summarized in 3 points. Money and finance cannot be kept separate and crucially affect the real economy. The Keynesian notions of uncertainty and liquidity preference constitute the foundations on which theorizing over money and finance should rely. That's a very important point. Significant. That's where all the struggle is over uncertainty and liquidity. People have gotten Nobel Prizes for that crap. The role of finance increases over time, as 2008 has shown, with a change of regime to a quote unquote money manager capitalism. And with all due respect, MMT kind of plays on that in a certain way. That is, it plays on the fetish, and I will refer to it as a fetish for monetary theory or monetarism, and a critique of capitalism, because I think you could do both, and that's kind of what MMT does, among many other things. So let's see. I guess I included. Oh yes, I read this on Friday, so I think I did. Da, 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 da. Now let me read it again because I'm sure you weren't thinking about it anyway. The dialectic of organic slash inorganic relations, that is, Marx and the Hegelian philosophy of nature, John Bellamy Foster and Paul Burkett, or Burkett. Ecological thinkers have suggested that in applying an organic-inorganic distinction to humanity dash nature, Marx embraced a dualistic and antagonistic conception of the human nature relationship. The authors confront this view in this particular paper by considering how Marx's various applications of the concept organic and inorganic were shaped not only by standard scientific usage, and this is important to Marx, right? The whole soil thing and geology stuff and Darwin, but also by Marx's engagement with Hegel's natural philosophy and the historical struggle. This is an important historical struggle because this is, young Hegelians, Feuerbach, etc. The historical struggle between materialism and teleology. And that's kind of still, it's still a big deal. And of course, it's all implied in the various kerfuffles we're having, right? Christian nationalism, et cetera, et cetera. Why are you discriminating against minorities like Jews and uh, intersectional categories and racial categories because they're not closer to, heaven or whatever the hell. Because that's exactly what's going on right now. And certain opportunists are obviously, they're King Cyrus or whoever the hell they are, but they are obviously just opportunists. They find that Marx's usage was based on an explicit disavowal, and you can see this in Bellamy Foster's work, of all mechanistic and dualistic views of the human nature relationship. And that's kind of an ongoing mechanical relationship, or at least an assumption in some reasoning. In Marx's mature works, as you saw in the Bellamy Foster book, in Marx's mature works, all fixed oppositions between organic and inorganic gave way to a fully dialectical understanding of ecological processes. Marx's growing concern with the metabolic rift between humanity and nature generated by capitalist production led him to link the question of communism with that of ecological sustainability, and that the through line is there in Marx. It's not like people invented this and imposed it. It was always there. He just, it may be Engels who doesn't kind of push it in the right direction, or he tends to go off on some other thing about science, etc. Their analysis thus sheds light on the opposition between idealist and materialist visions of ecology. And so I skipped to the conclusion at issue in the standard critique of Marx's organic inorganic distinction. And there are two different and strongly opposed visions of ecological philosophy. One that is materialist, historical, and essentially scientific in character. The other that derives its emphasis from mystical distinctions between anthropocentric and ecocentric, and from spiritualistic allusions to nature's teleology. That's all that Gaia stuff that other people are really into, because it's there, but that and a buck probably buys coffee. So you really want to work through that, just because. From the latter standpoint, it's impossible to perceive the real class exploitative alienation of nature. Yeah, because you're too busy enjoying it, even though other people can't, whatever. Hence, the social problem underlying ecological destruction disappears, giving way, as Bookchin aptly puts it, the father of the sort of anarchistic father of social ecology, to a philosophy of personal redemption, ritualistic behavior, and the like. For ecology to be related to social transformation, it must adopt a material social standpoint that emphasizes the reality, the this-sidedness of the degradation of nature, not as a mere ethical problem, but as a problem of real existence in human praxis. In other words, you got to build the damn trolley before you ask a trolley question. Marx's approach provides just such a standpoint. The conventional antinomies of nature, culture, environment, society, human, non-human, and subject-object. They're all there. And Timothy Luke, who writes great stuff, has written all implode in Marx's rendition of these links as one active organic inorganic project. In Marx's materialist dialectic of organic inorganic relations, one finds neither a narrowly instrumentalist anthropocentric perspective nor a flight into mysticism, but rather the core of an ecological critique of capitalist society, a critique that should allow us to translate ecology into revolutionary praxis. And so hence the divide between Matt Huber and what's his name, Moore. And it's really an important point, because these two guys who actually work, maybe 100 miles from each other, and they do talk to each other, sit on the opposite sides of this divide. Anyway, Marx's notion that labor is the sole source of value under capitalism, a view that he shared with the other classical economists, is sometimes taken as an indication of the anti-ecological nature of his thought, a view that Clark exploits here. Yet the significance of Marx's argument in this respect is frequently misunderstood, because Marx also repeatedly insisted that labor is not the sole source of use value or wealth, nature being just as important or more important in that respect. Indeed, in Marx's view, the fact that capitalistic values disregard nature's contribution to wealth only points to the one-sided, alienated reality of capitalist society and its law of value, which needs to be transcended, yes, transcended in post-capitalist society. That's the Burkett and Foster position. The concept of extension as a property of matter or the body has long been a crucial part of the materialist conception of nature, as Hobbes wrote in De Corpore. It's not from 1929. It's about, 18th century, whatever. A body is that which, having no dependence upon our thought, is coincident or coextended with some part of space. So there's something material in there, right? And then Marx's argument here, note 7, that the earth or land, the earth/land, should never be treated as individual or even communal property, contradicts completely Routley's contention, previously discussed, that Marx viewed nature as property in the standard sense of free disposability and exploitability, as opposed to communally limited user rights. And so this is an underlying question that people need to sort of work through, issues of, communist issues that, the point of communism is not so much about communism itself. It is about the, erasure of property relations, the erasure of class relations, and it is utopian in that sense, but seemingly not impossible to those who believe in Star Trek, for example. And then I talked about numeraire last week and the difference in equilibrium. I talked about time-space compression, I think, and there is a difference in the geography literature about time-space issues. And then I did read the Pastoni sort of developments on top of Massey's ideas, and then I made a minor mention of uh, her kind of last big work, Space, Place, and Gender, which does bring all a bunch of stuff together in terms of thinking about intersectional stuff. Um, and there are key concepts in her work, needless to say. And so she and Eleanor Ostrom, kind of the giants of rethinking space and place issues in very different ways, certainly, but that they're important from those perspectives. And I think I read all this on Friday. And needless to say, there is a literature on spatial divisions of labor, social structures, and the geography of production, which is very interesting literature. And, it's probably a little arcane or anachronistic, but I think it's worth thinking about that. And as I've mentioned before, because I'm going to end in a second, the difference that this describes is one that is both quantitative and qualitative, and it tries to bridge those two kind of discourses and to separate them or make them more autonomous is actually to short circuit the whole general idea that if you're going to get to some place like praxis, right, some place for revolutionary subjectivity, you're going to have the whole enchilada. You're going to have both enchiladas. um, Something where you can actually come up with the numbers and render them empirically viable, and also have the philosophical chops to be able to say, well, this is kind of, this is not a, this is falsifiable, and yet it has spiritual implications. So that's kind of where this will all end, I suppose, or before I croak or whatever. So let's see if there's any comments. No. Although Lane's comment, the society of putting things on top of other things, that's pretty much it, I suppose, which is what I do. Um, Proud to do it. In fact, let me thank you for your attention. So I'm gonna, because we're right, I think, on the cusp here of ending my little time here. I think other things are coming up, and that are more interesting than my yammering on. And maybe we're going to look at slides of travel and pictures and fun stuff as opposed to my yammering on. So